So now the machine has finished its prime and tune cycle successfully, and what it's done is gone to the first operating screen. So, phaco 1 is the first stage in most doctors' procedure. It's used for putting a groove or two, particularly in divide and conquer, into the nucleus. After they groove the nucleus and they crack the nucleus, the next phase is phaco 2.
And the nurse hits that?
Yes. All the modes for the machine to move forward in its program go up and down this side of the screen. Phaco 2 is for evacuating the 4 segments that you've made and then cracked. Phaco 3 is for epinucleus. Epinucleus is a very gummy consistency, a lot thicker than cortex, and it can be left as a shell when the nucleus has been extracted. This mode is particularly set for that. My recollection is that Dr. Goodman does not use this mode very often, but he may. So, either after phaco 2 or phaco 3, you're going to want to go to IA to remove the cortex. So when you touch the IA folder button, the phaco folder collapses, the IA opens up, and the machine defaults to cortex, which is always the first step in IA. So these are the cortex removal settings. CapVac is for polishing the capsule. My recollection is that Dr. Goodman does not use the machine for this stage of the procedure, but in case he does, it's available to him. And the viscoelastic mode is for removing the viscoelastic after the IOL has been implanted. So the main difference between cortical cleanup and viscoelastic removal is the flow rate. The flow rate is generally lower on cortical removal because you want to be gentle with that tissue. But when it comes to removing the viscoelastic, there's really less concern about the flow and the gentleness of the flow, and there's much more emphasis on having a high flow rate that removes the viscoelastic quickly.
Okay.
So, now we're going to go to vitrectomy, which hopefully we won't go to. But in case we do, we'll be prepared. So, when you hit the vitrectomy button, the next thing you get is the vitrectomy setup screen, which shows you how to connect the tube. The vitrector comes packaged like this. Okay. Now, there's 3 tubes coming off the vitrector. One is very long, 2 is short. The very long one is also colored green. So when we undo our paper here, we'll see that the green one is quite long. The green one is the pneumatic drive for the vitrectomy cutter. So it's the compressed air source that makes the blade, go up and down. So all we do is we put this down here, come over to the machine on the top here, gently turn that in. So that connects the pneumatic drive. I'm going to show you both ways for connecting the vitrector. My recollection is that Dr. Goodman does it the first way, which is coaxial. So, when you remove the vitrector from its holder, The other two tubings are going to connect to the IA tubing that was on the phaco handpiece. You can see that this is the irrigation tubing because it's connected to the irrigation sleeve that's over the vitrectomy probe. This is the aspiration tubing. Okay. Now we've connected all of our tubing and we're ready to prime the vitrectomy. So what we need is a small amount of fluid. Normally there'll be a medicine cup on the field, and that's what you put the BSS in.
Okay.
So we dip our probe into the fluid source, and we hit the Start Vit Prime button. There's a bypass button over here. On the initial setup of the vitrectomy, you never hit bypass. You always hit Start Vit Prime. The reason for that is that if you don't do the priming sequence, you don't test the vitrectomy probe, and you may have a problem if there's some type of issue with the cutter blade not working, and that could cause a retinal detachment if you put the vitrectomy probe into the eye, aspirate, and then have no cutting. So that's why you always hit Start Vit Prime. Okay. Now, during the Vit Prime process, the machine aspirates and clears the vitrectomy tubing of air, which naturally it starts off with, and it also tests the blade, which you can feel when you're holding this in the cup.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, in vitrectomy itself, there's two modes that are of great importance. There's ICA, which stands for irrigation, cut, aspiration, and there's IAC, which stands for irrigation, aspiration, cut. The difference is this. The first mode, ICA, that the machine defaults to, is for cutting vitreous.
Is it just labeled
ICA.
vitrectomy? It's not labeled ICA,
This one's vitrectomy 1, excuse me.
but that's just, they renamed it.
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And if you look over here on the panel,
I see it, yeah,
it
I
says
see it.
ICA.
Okay.
So here's how this works. In ICA, first you get irrigation, then you get cutting, importantly, before you start aspiration. The reason for this is to ensure that you do not aspirate any vitreous that isn't cut first. So naturally, if you've broken the capsule, the anterior chamber is probably going to be filled with vitreous, and you need to clean it out, and you need a fast cut rate, 1000 CPM in this instance, and the blade engaging before the aspiration. One of the most important things to watch for when a doctor starts doing a vitrectomy, because they don't do vitrectomy often, is that a lot of times the doctor will step down and initiate cutting, but not step down far enough to initiate aspiration. So you have to watch this flow meter over here to ensure that the doctor is stepping down far enough to actually be, removing vitreous. Very important, very important. Okay. IAC is different from ICA because it's made for removing cortex and fragments of the nucleus that are, often left after the capsule's been broken. So, the difference is that here, aside from the blade turning on after the aspiration, is that the cut rate is very low, 300. The reason for that is to allow the particles and the material to enter into the port to be cut off. At that 1,000 CPM cut rate, it wouldn't allow any material that
It's too
wasn't
fast.
virtually like a gel or a fluid to enter into the port. So you'd be spending a lot of time getting nothing done. Not to mention that when you're cleaning up around the capsule, the whole point of having the blade come on last is to allow you to use the vitrector as an IA handpiece in a way. And then naturally, if the doctor sees that he's engaged some vitreous, he floors it, and the blade turns on and cuts it. So that's how that works. The final button on the machine, is diathermy.
Diathermy 1.
Diathermy is another name for cautery. My recollection is Dr. Goodman never uses this. In current surgical practice, very few doctors still do a limbal tunnel, or a scleral tunnel, incision where the cautery is used routinely. So it's just here in case you need it, and with today's surgical practice, the
People
most
don't.
likely use for the cautery on the machine would be a combined trabeculectomy, phaco procedure, where the doctor is playing with the sclera, creating a flap for his trabeculectomy. So that kind of wraps up where the machine is in normal operation, but to have a little extra fun, what we're going to do now is we're going to set up the machine with the most common errors that staff make to show the error messages that you got and the fixes for those error messages. So we'll disconnect the vitrector.
And by disconnecting it, so if someone did use it, this is just how they would disconnect it? Exactly what you're doing right now?
Yes. Generally speaking, the only reason you would disconnect the vitrector is if the doctor wanted to do cortical cleanup with the IA handpiece. The issue with that is that with no cutting action, if vitreous presents, you're going to put tension on it and you may get a retinal detachment. It's generally best, once vitreous has been introduced into the surgical picture, to use the vitrector only from then on. So that would include the removal of any nuclear chips, cortical cleanup, and even the viscoelastic removal after the implantation of the lens, whichever lens that may be. So, now that we've detached this, what we're going to do is we're going to take off the sleeve, loosen up the phaco tip, we put the sleeve back on,
Do you have to prime tune or anything?
well, I'm going to show you.
Okay.
Okay. So, at the end of every case, there's this button up here that says end case. So we touch the end case button.
End case.
There we go. Then there's a button right under here, under the button that says purge, next case. And we go back to the priming screen. So, what we're going to do now is we're going to prime and tune the machine when we know it's not going to